Hello, my name is Jonathan Durand, and today I'll be completing the curriculum analysis for the Ohio State 8th grade mathematics curriculum. During my presentation, I will be looking at the foundational, organizational, content, and assessment elements of the curriculum, and I will be offering some of my critique both in regard to the curriculum as well as in its assessment. I will first be looking into the foundational elements of the curriculum. The standards themselves were revised in 2016 by an advisory committee. Much of the revisions aligned the new Ohio standards with those of Common Core, which we see utilized in many of the states across the United States today. The advisory committee itself consisted of individuals from various entities, such as the Ohio Council of Teachers of Mathematics, the Ohio Federation of Teachers, the Ohio Education Association, the Ohio Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, as well as individuals from many other entities. The advisory committee also considered both public feedback as well as some feedback from teachers and curriculum supervisors. The process goal became to better prepare students for college and careers, wanting students not just be able to produce answers to math problems, but to be able to apply their mathematical knowledge to either career situations or to be used it within the college setting. In addition, the goal of the standards themselves is to define what students should understand and be able to do in their study of mathematics. Much of the philosophy behind the modern 8th grade mathematics curriculum can be summarized with the phrase, an inch wide and a mile deep. There's a debate in mathematics instruction between two schools of thought. The first school proposes that mathematics instruction is most effective when we concentrate on a small body of knowledge but teach it in great depth. The second school of thought proposes that it is best to cover a wide variety of topics, but naturally due to the limits of time and resources that those topics can't be covered in too much depth. When creating the standards for the modern Ohio curriculum, the revision committee found that it was most effective to cover a smaller body of knowledge, but in greater detail. When considering successful students both in the United States as well as other nations, they found that students that had a deeper understanding of material had better rates of retention and had better ability to apply their mathematical knowledge to scenarios outside of the academic classroom. Consequently, the philosophy of an inch wide and a mile deep is utilized throughout much of the standards. This philosophy seeks to emphasize understanding versus memorization, and justification of mathematical processes rather than just a production of them. This distinction can be illustrated in the example below. Here I've provided three expressions. For those of you who haven't been in the math classroom for a while, you may have just panicked and turned off the presentation right now. But for those of you who are still with me, the first expression, the second expression, and the third expression all use what is called the distributive property. However, they use it in different ways. Students that have a deep understanding of the distributive property find all three of these problems to be very, very similar, and the process for solving them is almost identical. However, for students who don't have this depth of understanding and instead focus merely on regurgitating what the teacher has said or producing answers similar to what the teacher did, these three expressions look very, very different. When asked to evaluate, many students will look at the first expression and immediately use the phrase FOIL, which many of you guys may remember from your time in high school. When looking at the second expression, students will say, oh, that's the distributive property that I learned back in 6th grade, 5th grade. However, when given the third expression, many students give up and say that the problem becomes impossible. This is the distinction between an inch wide and a mile deep. Is it better to have students understand the philosophy of what they're doing and understand their mathematical reasoning in such a way that they don't need to memorize a separate process for every single problem? Or is it better to memorize a bunch of mnemonic devices and gimmicks in order to get answers? The Ohio State Modern 8th grade mathematics curriculum sides with the former. Looking into the organization of the curriculum, it is broken down predominantly into two sections. I will cover both of these sections in more detail in a moment, but to overview both of them, the first is the standards for mathematical practice. This standards for mathematical practice describe the varieties of expertise that mathematics educators at all levels should seek to develop in their students. These standards remain consistent throughout the entire mathematics curriculum, beginning in kindergarten and progressing all the way through high school. The second part of the Ohio 8th grade math standards is the Ohio 8th grade content standards themselves. These standards are specific to 8th grade and are organized by domains, which I will also cover momentarily. These standards encourage part-to-whole sequencing, though utilize some thematic topic sequencing. For example, within the standards themselves, oftentimes the fundamental elements of a larger concept are taught first. Students are taught how to use properties of exponents before they are taught how to apply scientific notation. Students are taught how to solve an equation and how to solve a problem involving exponents before they are asked to use Pythagorean theorem. In this way, the standards are using part-to-whole sequencing. Students are instructed on the individual parts of a problem and then asked to apply that knowledge to the whole entire problem later on. In addition, the domains themselves are broken down by thematic topic, and to a degree, the sequencing of the curriculum oftentimes aligns with these thematic topics. These topics will be explained in the domains later. I will first discuss the standards for mathematical practice. There are 8 of these standards, and they are universally significant across all levels of math, from kindergarten through 12th grade. While these skills are not directly assessed on assessments, they are essential to the 8th grade curriculum, as the ability for students to apply these 8 skills is essential in order to succeed in the mathematics classroom. For example, if students do not know how to use appropriate tools, such as a calculator or a piece of graph paper, they will find many 8th grade problems to be very challenging or impossible. In addition, such skills as being able to make sense or solve problems, or even reason abstractly and quantitatively, are essential and daily used in a mathematics classroom. As mentioned before, the 8th grade learning standards themselves highlight specifically what students should be able to do in the 8th grade. These standards are specific to the 8th grade and are broken down into 5 domains. The first, number sense, oftentimes focuses with square roots and rational and irrational numbers. The second, equations and expressions, focuses on solving equations as well as properties of exponents and scientific notation. Functions oftentimes focuses on the basic elements of functions as well as identifying key aspects of linear equations, such as initial value and rate of change. Geometry focuses on such topics as volumes of cones, cylinders, and spheres, Pythagorean theorem, such as in the image shown on the right, as well as angle relationships and geometric transformations. Statistics focuses predominantly on two-way tables as well as correlation and scatter plots. The standards themselves, in addition to being broken up by domain, are then further broken down into specific tasks in which students are given specific direction as to what they are expected to do in problems. The verbs in these standards highlight specifically what students are supposed to do. Are they supposed to understand a topic? Are they supposed to demonstrate a topic? Are they supposed to be able to solve, evaluate? The specific requirements for each standard are very clearly outlined in many of the standards, and some of the more complexly written standards do provide examples to assist with understanding. When looking at content, learning progression and age appropriateness are essential qualities for any curriculum. These are strongly emphasized in the 8th grade math curriculum for Ohio. The Ohio K-8 Learning Progressions document states the concept of learning progressions is important for the understanding and coherence of mathematical topics within and across the grade level. This can be seen in the way that the standards build upon grades from previous levels. For example, ratios and proportions are a significant part of both 6th grade and 7th grade. However, in 8th grade, students are asked to build upon their knowledge of ratios and proportions by graphing proportional relationships, and further being able to make distinctions between a proportional relationship and a non-proportional linear relationship. In addition, 6th grade students are asked to solve single-step equations, and 7th grade students are asked to solve two-step equations. This prepares students for 8th grade, in which we are asked to solve multi-step equations. These multi-step equations can involve distributive property, combining like terms, and eliminating terms, all of which are touched upon in previous grades. By using elements from previous grades, This ensures that the curriculum is age appropriate for the current 8th graders. It ensures that students have the prerequisite tools to be able to function and understand the 8th grade material. However, the focus is not entirely on 8th grade, and focus in math must always be directed forward. In addition to building upon prior knowledge, students are also asked to learn foundational skills that will ensure that future instruction is also age appropriate and tailored to their level of understanding. Much of 8th grade instruction is directed towards algebra. For example, the introduction of functions in 8th grade prepares students for Algebra 1, in which they will ask to not only be able to identify functions, but distinguish between linear, exponential, and quadratic functions. In addition, understanding initial value and rate of change will be essential for Algebra 1 and many of the linear functions they will encounter there. Correlation is another example in which instruction is future directed. In 8th grade, students are asked to identify correlations as strong, weak, positive, or negative, and they will apply this knowledge down the road in algebra to identify correlation coefficients. In addition to the age appropriateness of this content, there is a significant emphasis on application. While this can be found in some of Ohio's supplemental resources for their curriculum, it is also found within the standards themselves. For example, when looking at cones, cylinders, and spheres, students are asked to find the volumes of each and apply it to real-world scenarios. In addition, many of the Ohio standards in the curriculum provide examples which highlight the application to the real world. For example, when discussing scientific notations, the example specifically highlights how to use scientific notation to find the population of the United States relative to the population of the world and consider how many times greater the population of the world is than that of the United States. In these ways, the content is both age appropriate as students have the prerequisite knowledge and tailored to the developmental cognitive level of the students, while also ensuring that the content can have some real-world application. The model curriculum acts as an excellent supplement to instruction. While it is not intended to be a curriculum map or an assessment tool, it is designed to give clarity for standards, provide a foundation for assessment, and to guide educators in their instructional practices. It seeks to supplement and modernize the curriculum by incorporating common misconceptions, career connections, and technological tips. For example, it highlights misconceptions among students that all fractions might be rational numbers. It provides career connections, such as when discussing Pythagorean theorem. During this discussion of Pythagorean theorem, the document highlights that Pythagorean theorem is often used for construction and encourages teachers to use this during instruction. Finally, the document has many technological suggestions. For example, it highlights when use of a Desmos calculator may benefit students. Additionally, it highlights situations where the GeoGebra applet may be beneficial, such as when conducting reflections in the geometric transformations unit. In these ways, the document attempts to connect content to job opportunities and incorporate technology into the modern classroom. When it comes to assessment, the only formal mode of assessment is the annual 8th grade math state test. This is an online assessment that is broken down into 2 sections of about 90 minutes apiece. The assessment is summative in nature and provides no formative assessment information for educators. The test has about 40 to 50 questions that are divided equally among the 2 sections, and these questions are directly tied to the standards. The tests have varied question types, including multiple choice, select all that apply, graph creation, drop down, and open response. Every year, a sample of the questions, as well as rubrics for those questions, are released in a released item report. These rubrics provide information for educators on how different elements are assessed and graded to help supplement curriculum and instruction. Assessment within the curriculum focuses heavily on Webb's depth of knowledge. This depth of knowledge is illustrated in the graphic on the right and has many similarities to Bloom's taxonomy. The 4 levels of knowledge are recall, skills and concepts, strategic thinking, and extended thinking. Assessment within the curriculum focuses predominantly on level 2, these skills and concepts, though it does have some elements for recall and some elements for strategic thinking. While the end-of-year state test is the only formal assessment within the curriculum, teachers and educators in districts are encouraged to find their own formative, diagnostic, and summative assessments to inform their own instruction. To this end, educators and textbook companies have a lot of opportunity and flexibility to create their own assessments that they feel best enriches their own classroom and meets the needs of their students. In addition, there are some privately owned entities that create assessments which can be used for both diagnostic as well as evaluative purposes. The district I work in uses the iReady program to complete beginning of the year diagnostics on students, as well as to perform diagnostic tracking of student growth and progress. STAR assessments also can provide some diagnostic as well as formative and summative assessment in this regard. Regarding the curriculum, I do have some critiques. First, from an organization and content standpoint, there is an extreme reliance on mathematical foundations. While this is excellent in an ideal sense, in a practical sense, there are some concerns. First, from a developmental standpoint, there can be some question about whether or not elementary school students are truly ready for the deep mathematical understanding that the overall K-12 curriculum calls for. From both a cognitive and developmental standpoint, many students do not begin to develop deep analytical and reasoning skills until later in elementary school and even middle school. So the question of the appropriateness of forming deep understandings in the first, second, and third grade level is a legitimate question. Secondly, there are some concerns about the preparedness of elementary educators. There are many fantastic and excellent elementary school teachers, and the jobs we do in the middle and high school would not even be remotely accomplishable without their tremendous effort and work. However, by their own admission, many elementary school educators will also admit that they aren't necessarily math people. While there are certainly many that are, there are many who would probably not list math as one of their favorite subjects. However, the current curriculum demands that they not only teach math in a way that fosters deep critical understanding, but also that they have a deep and critical understanding of mathematics themselves. Unfortunately, they've never been taught how to instruct in this manner, and oftentimes have not been given assistance to develop these deep understandings. Consequently, many new practices have been proposed that are designed to deepen student understanding of math. However, they come off as rote procedures. This is the origin of new math. As a person who teaches mathematics and a person who has talked to many other people who teach math, new math is nothing more than the old math we've been doing since the dawn of time, just with new techniques or proposed new ways of solving problems. However, for many elementary school educators and for many parents and students who do not necessarily have the same depth of knowledge that someone who teaches calculus might have, these new methods look foreign, strange, and don't quite make sense. Consequently, many times teachers double down on memorization gimmicks and techniques because they simply have never been taught or told how they're properly supposed to instruct this deep understanding of math. Consequently, many people believe that math has now entered an era of new math, in which the old math no longer applies and new procedures must be used on a daily basis. In reality, the stuff that always worked will still continue to work. However, new math just proposes alternative ways of thinking about problems. However, without a deep understanding of math, it is very difficult to make this distinction. A second critique is that the curriculum stresses the significance of vertical alignment but does not highlight prerequisite standards. When teaching students in 8th grade who have trouble with, say, fractions, there is nothing within the standards that directs me to where students begin to develop that foundation for fractional knowledge. Consequently, it can be very difficult to find a reference point for students when trying to remediate or catch students up to speed who may be behind. Thirdly, with regard to organization and content, some content does feel out of place. A good example would be the geometric transformations unit that can be found later on in the 8th grade standards. Well, many of the 8th grade standards stem directly from topics students learned in 7th grade and progress directly into topics students will learn in algebra. Geometric transformations do neither. They do not build on any real topic that students learned in prior grades, and they will not be used again until students take geometry, which will not be for at least another 1 or possibly even 2 years, depending on the sequencing of classes within a district. Consequently, content such as this feels somewhat out of place, and its potential removal from the curriculum could be worth some consideration. Finally, I have some critiques with regard to the assessment. First, the tests are exclusively online. This can create some problems for districts with limited access to technology, as well as problems for families with limited access to technology or the internet at home. Math is a very high skill intensive subject and requires a significant amount of practice. Without access to technology, the only way to get this practice is to do paper pencil or whiteboard practice. Consequently, for these students who come from districts or homes with limited technological access, making a jump from paper pencil to online assessment can be complicated and difficult. Granted, as we move forward and as technology becomes more common and more readily available, this critique will probably begin to diminish. However, in the meantime, when some families and some students still lack internet access at home, and some districts have significant absence of technology in their classrooms, this concern still bears some weight. In addition, the question types on the assessment for the curriculum lack consistency. A student may be asked to solve a multiple choice problem. That question may be followed with a select all that apply, followed by 2 open responses, followed by another multiple choice, and then a graph. This lack of consistency in test format can leave students confused and disoriented. Comparing this to other state assessments, such as the New York State End-of-Year Regents exam, a mathematics student in high school for New York would understand going into their assessment that they're going to have to complete a series of multiple choice questions, and then they would be asked to complete some open response questions, which would generally award some version of partial credit. By contrast, in Ohio, the state test lacks any consistency. Students begin an assessment without knowing what to expect. This can leave students confused as they attempt to move from question to question, not knowing what type of question they will be asked next. In addition, the absence of partial credit makes it very hard to distinguish between a student who truly has no understanding of a concept compared to a student who may have only made a simple mistake, such as dropping a negative. While this lack of format has understandably been put into the curriculum as a way of preventing teachers from gaming the test or teaching the test, the effect that it can have on students and on their ability to perform during an assessment can lead to some misleading results and can confuse students. My final critique of the assessment is that the data it provides is not returned promptly enough for teachers to use. While this is true of many end-of-year exams, in Ohio the state tests are typically taken in March or April, leaving over a month for assessment data to be returned to the schools. However, this assessment data is not returned until later on, typically in June, and this can often leave teachers hopeless and helpless to actually make meaningful change in the limited time they have between the completion of the assessment and the end of the school year. On this slide, I have placed some of the references that I have used during the presentation. In addition to these references, Ohio Department of Education has provided a multitude of resources on their site. During the creation of this presentation, I looked over and gained information from much of those resources. However, these are the only ones which I directly cited within the presentation itself. Thank you.